Mr. Kara-Murza apparently haunts the dreams of Vladimir Putin. The first major opposition figure to emerge as a potential rival to Vladimir Putin was an entrepreneur billionaire who ran the one Russian oil company that actually knew what it was doing. His name was Mikhail Khodorkovsky. I wrote about this extensively in a book that I wrote a couple of years ago called Blowout. If you ever want to read this backstory here, I think it is an amazing story. But basically, this guy, this entrepreneur, billionaire guy, he became the richest businessman in Russia. He then challenged Putin. He made this public challenge that Russia needs to be a real democracy and the government needs to stop stealing everything and stop being so corrupt. That was such a threat to Vladimir Putin that Putin had him arrested on made-up charges, seized his company and took it for himself. And then Putin had the guy locked up in prison for a decade. After he got out of prison, at the end of a decade, he fled the country. He now lives in exile. But Mikhail Khodorkovsky founded a pro-democracy group that operates internationally. It's called Open Russia. And it advocates for democracy in Russia, for civil society. It advocates against corruption in Russia. That, of course, is very threatening to Vladimir Putin. After Khodorkovsky himself threatened him, Putin was then threatened by the organization that Khodorkovsky founded. And so Putin, of course, had the organization banned. He had Open Russia declared illegal. But until Open Russia was banned, the guy who was running it was Vladimir Kara-Murza. And he keeps popping up in places like this. The next real credible rival to Vladimir Putin was this man, a charismatic opposition politician named Boris Nemtsov. Nemtsov was brilliant, really well-spoken. He was a physicist by training. He was 6'5". He'd held a lot of different prominent public offices in Russia, including being deputy prime minister. And he emerged ultimately as this outspoken crusader against corruption in the Russian government. And so naturally, just like Khodorkovsky before him, Boris Nemtsov emerged as a huge threat to Putin. For one thing, he was another real credible challenger to Putin. And so, of course, he had to go too. With him, they didn't go through the trouble that they went through with the oil guy. They didn't go through the trouble of arresting him and jailing him and stealing his company and exiling him. For Boris Nemtsov, they went a simpler route. They just killed him. 4 bullets in the back for Boris Nemtsov as he walked along the street just outside the Kremlin. That was in 2015. But here, too, again, we find our friend Vladimir Kara-Murza. There is a foundation named for Boris Nemtsov. It supports journalism, supports freedom of the press. Every year they give the Boris Nemtsov Prize for courage in upholding democratic values. Vladimir Kara-Murza runs that foundation. He ran the foundation that was founded by Mikhail Khodorkovsky. He ran the foundation. He runs the foundation, founded in the name of Boris Nemtsov. I mean, the pattern here is clear. Part of the way Vladimir Putin stays in power in Russia is that he keeps imprisoning and killing all the opposition figures in Russia. They've got Alexei Navalny in jail now. After nearly killing him with poison, they had Mikhail Khodorkovsky in jail for a decade. Now he's in exile. Boris Nemtsov, they had him just gunned down in the street. But the opposition, it keeps trying. It keeps going. Vladimir Kara-Murza, linked to all these opposition figures, a very high-profile opposition figure in his own right, carrying on the work of all these killed and imprisoned leaders to keep the opposition alive in Russia, literally alive, and politically alive. And he has paid the price for it, too. In 2015, Vladimir Kara-Murza was poisoned. Him, too. Multiple organ failure. He had to learn to walk again. It took him a year and a half to recover when he was poisoned in 2015, but he lived. Then 2 years later, he was traveling in Russia, inside Russia, promoting a documentary about the life and the assassination of Boris Nemtsov. Somehow, Vladimir Kara-Murza was poisoned again. Twice in 2 years. Again, in and out of a coma, multiple organ failure again. His wife somehow got him out of Russia and into the United States for him to try to recover here. Doctors here told her that he had a 5% chance of survival. But he survived. And in 2017, as he was still recovering from that second assassination attempt, in fact, he was right here on this show. We saw the offices of Alexei Navalny's organization get ransacked and have all their computers and all their paperwork and all their staff getting arrested. Open Russia getting banned this week. The raid on your offices there this week. I mean, how do you maintain any sort of momentum, any sort of organizing structure against that?
Well, I mean, the other side, if you just look at it formally, the other side, of course, does have a massive advantage, right? They have all the so-called law enforcement agencies. They have the entire propaganda machine. They have the whole power of the state on their side. But what we have, I think, is something much more important, and that is the truth.
As Vladimir Putin's war against Ukraine grinds on now, we're in what, day 44, day 45? As tonight we field the first unconfirmed reports that Russian forces may have used a chemical weapon in Ukraine. As the number of Russians arrested for opposing Putin's war dwarfs the number of arrests we saw even from the big opposition protests in Russia in 2012 and 2017. As Putin has now eliminated the last vestiges of the independent press in that country, as he has made it a criminal act to even call the war in Ukraine a war, as tens of thousands of Russian citizens have fled their own country, probably permanently, to escape Putin and what he is doing now to Russia as he wages this war. This man, Vladimir Kara-Murza, has stayed to try to keep the opposition to Putin alive, or perhaps to die trying. Yesterday, he spoke with Ali Velshi from Moscow. Today, Vladimir Kara-Murza was arrested. He was seized by the Russian authorities. It was first reported by Russian dissident chess champion Garry Kasparov. It was later confirmed by the Boris Nemtsov Foundation, which Mr. Kara-Murza leads. Mr. Kara-Murza was taken earlier today by Russian authorities. His whereabouts tonight are unknown. When he spoke with Ali just yesterday, I don't want to say that he knew it was coming, but he knew he was in Russia at this time, still speaking his mind. And he was eyes open, facing it head on.
Are you worried about speaking out against the Russian government and against this war and invasion from Russia?
We all know the price. We all know the cost. But we also know that there are millions of people in Russia who categorically oppose Putin regime and everything it's doing, both in terms of domestic repression and in terms of external aggression. We know that there are many people in Russia who want our country to be a normal, modern, democratic European state. I think it would be very demoralizing if those of us who are sort of the public faces of the pro-democracy movement, of the opposition movement, would all just leave the country. I do not, condemn anybody. It's everybody's personal decision. But if you're asking about me, I'm a Russian politician. Russia is my country. Russia is my home, and this is where I have to be.
I'm worried for you, my friend. You have been a source of my information for many, many years, so I'll worry on your behalf.
That was yesterday, Ali telling Vladimir Kara-Murza how worried he was on his behalf. But again, Mr. Kara-Murza, Russian opposition leader who has twice already survived poisoning assassination attempts, today he was seized by Russian authorities, arrested after giving an interview to CNN and after giving that interview to MSNBC just yesterday. Other opposition activists in Russia have reportedly gone tonight where the police station where they believe he may have been taken. They are calling for his release. We'll let you know more as we learn more.